Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, homeless and hungry. South Sudan is on the verge of famine. So who's to blame for this latest crisis? Now, the last time we did a show about South Sudan on the stream was back in January of this year. Each time, Malika Bilal, we revisit South Sudan. It seems like the crisis, the story there gets worse and worse. And today is one example of that.
Exactly.
What are you seeing online?
Well, that's exactly what our community is saying, and they're sharing stories with us that are really painting a picture of how bad it really is. And one of those is from someone who knows well. This is a senior UN official in Juba. Toby Lanzer tweets the stream: imagine the poorest of the poor struggling to get by. Then violence, political and intercommunal, erupts, making it hard to tend to your livestock. Markets are shattered, cities destroyed, and then come the rains. A time to plant, but you can't reach your fields. 4 million at risk of famine. Well, that's quite a vivid picture there. We want to hear your thoughts on this, so tweet us your questions and your comments with hashtag AJStream.
So Twitter is one way that you can get in touch with us. There's also Facebook and Google+, but also if you want to be part of the conversation via video, have a look over here at stream.aljazeera.com. You click on here with respond with a video comment. We're actually asking you about what should the international community do to help end famine in South Sudan? You click record there. Now you can even do this actually on your smartphone, anything that will record it. You allow the little device to record and then you end up eventually sending a message to be in the screen, and you too could be on the stream.
My name is Kevin Rothrock. I'm project editor for Brunette Echo at Global Voices, and I'm in the stream.
The world's newest country, South Sudan, is on the brink of famine, but it's not a natural disaster. Nearly a year-long war has forced 1.5 million people out of their homes and created a serious food shortage. Violence erupted in December when President Salva Kiir accused his Vice President Riek Machar of actually plotting a coup. Since then, the two sides have been fighting, with the political fate of South Sudan hanging in the balance. On Tuesday, a UN Security Council envoy announced South Sudan will face sanctions if the country's leaders do not reach a peace deal. At the same time, the United States pledged $118 million to help feed the people of South Sudan. That's on top of millions already being contributed by other countries. Humanitarian organizations say the help that can't come soon enough. But to help us put this crisis into perspective, we have in our studio Jimmy Muller. He's president of Voices for Sudan. Via Skype from Juba, South Sudan, Awerial, he is Minister of Presidential Affairs. Mark Kay is a country representative with Save the Children. And in Nairobi, we have James Elder, who's a spokesman for UNICEF. So gentlemen, really appreciate you being here in the stream. Let me start with Mark, because I really want to get a really vivid example of what conditions are like down in the ground in South Sudan.
Well, actually, humanitarian conditions are absolutely dire, and Toby Lanzer has really sort of hit the nail on the head in that the conflict is impacting absolutely everything. You've got 1.5 million people who've been displaced as the fighting. You've got children who who are out of school, families who haven't been able to plant their crops, markets collapsing because there's just no food. And what we're seeing is this having disastrous impacts on those most vulnerable, those who really need this help the most. And what this is having in Save the Children is that it's having huge impacts on children who experience really horrific experiences. They've seen loved ones killed, they've seen their families torn apart, and they need help supporting that. And also what we're seeing is that with the imminent food crisis that's happening right now, is that if enough support is not given right now, what we can see is 50,000 children die from malnutrition by the end of the year.
I'm just looking at your Twitter feed, and there's a retweet that you did from Médecins Sans Frontières, so Doctors Without Borders, and here it says, the aerial view of flooded Bentiu camp, people sleep standing up with their children in their arms, and you can see the conditions here. What difference is that going to make to try and actually even get help to the communities who need it?
Well, I mean, all that help is absolutely crucial for this country right now, and it was also crucial that people are actually following through on their pledges, that they're not just pledging money, but they actually make sure that money is coming into the country, so that the support can be scaled up. In Bentiu right now, what we're seeing is, or what MSF have talked about, are absolutely horrific conditions where you've got families who've already been displaced, who are experiencing extremely distressing violence, are wading in knee-deep water and mud that's infected with sewage. And this is obviously really dangerous because you get water-contaminated diseases. We're seeing a cholera outbreak in other areas of the country that the children are currently responding to, with over 120 deaths from cholera already. There's widespread implications from this conflict, and it's really important that the humanitarian community, the international community, and that both the government of South Sudan and all parties to the conflict actually respond to that and make sure that they're putting in steps to make sure that the crisis is stopped.
Well, James, I want to share a tweet here from someone who tweeted us from South Sudan. This is Thean, who writes us from the northwestern part of the country. Life is hard now in South Sudan. Food items are very expensive, especially in the most conflict-affected areas and in the remote ones. So, James, the question is, what is the scope of this food crisis?
I think it's important to remember, you just showed images of Bentiu, and you mentioned that this is a man-made disaster. When you move around South Sudan, it has all the makings of a natural disaster. It looks as if fire and earthquake have ripped through areas, and of course that's where the conflict and the violence has been most severe. And then when you're in camps like the ones you showed in Bentiu or Malakal, it looks like a hurricane. It looks like a cyclone has gone through. You have swathes of water and people's lone possessions floating in the water, and as Mark pointed out, these are hotbeds for disease. They're terrible places to live. It's important to remember the people in those camps have homes maybe 5-10 kilometres outside of them. They're in those camps because they fear what's on the other side of the fence. So it's a slow burn for them. But of course, those people in those camps, in those terrible conditions that are improving as best they can, are 10% of the population. We've mentioned more than 1 million people are on the move, 1.5 million have lost their homes. We're talking more than 500,000 kids. These are incredible numbers. I know we talk of Gaza and Syria and Central African Republic, but there is no greater humanitarian crisis in the world right now in terms of its scale. 500,000 children's a terrifying number when you think of each individual story, what they've seen, what they endured, what they lost, what they left, and their vulnerability now in moving around the country. I've been out into these most remote areas, and this is where people really have nothing. This is where villages of 10,000 have swelled to 50,000, where organisations like UNICEF and the World Food Programme are flying out, doing rapid response missions, trying to reach with every available means. But the simple fact is that the funds still aren't there. I think that the humanitarian community knows what needs to be done. But if we are to prevent that looming famine, then action needs to happen now. And it's very clear that that action needs to happen for those children is right in practice and right in principle. It's right in practice because you save money doing it now versus in 10 days' time. And obviously it's right in principle because whether or not a famine is declared, children are dying today.
So, Owen, as you're listening to all of this, and this is your home country, this is somewhere where at some point people were very hopeful about what was going to happen with South Sudan, the natural resources of the people, and now you have this humanitarian disaster sitting right there on your doorstep. Who is actually responsible for what's happening to the people of your country right now?
Well, thank you very much for hosting me. In fact, before I start on this topic, let me say clearly that the situation which is happening in South Sudan today, regardless of who should be blamed for, we all as South Sudanese should bear full responsibility and say this situation is very unfortunate. After we had long decades of struggle, our people suffered enough, and there was no any reason for us again to come in to introduce among ourselves such suffering by our own selves. I really feel that this is our responsibility, and that's why the government is trying its level best to address this crisis by coming clearly, asking for peaceful settlement of the crisis. And my president has come asking, even in the next day after the crisis broke out, he made it very clear that he needs a peaceful solution to the crisis. In the past, we didn't have any infrastructure in the ground, and during this rainy season, with the people also trying to reach us as international community with all their support, we still feel that we have also natural disasters that we didn't have infrastructure. And it is very hard also for people to reach us wherever we have these needy people to be served. This is a situation which is there, and President came out clearly to reach the other side. And we had May 9th, where our president didn't delegate anybody, went straight to meet with Riek Machar. And again on June 10th, he went to do so. So we feel this is
Owen,
the situation for all of us.
So Owen, how much of South Sudan is actually fighting in conflict right now, like right this minute?
Well, the country has one ethnic group that is fighting, and these are the people of Riek Machar.
Right. So they have to fight someone, though. So you can't just have one ethnic group fighting. They have to be fighting someone.
Fighting the government.
Right.
It's government. It's not just.
So how much of the country? Because we've got 1.5 million people displaced here. So how much of the country is taken up with fighting?
Well, the fighting, there are elements who were within the government of the today, who were also the SPLA soldiers defected. We had more civilian population that were also dragged into this war. That is not really something that is right. We have children that are being used by the other side, and this is something very unfortunate. We feel it was not really a right decision to have all this situation in our new country.
All right, Minister, hold tight for a moment. Let me just go back to the community.
Well, the Minister talked about reaching those who need to be served and talking about the conflict that's preventing that. So we're hearing from people about the conflict and how it's affected their lives. This is someone who works in South Sudan. Have a listen to this video comment.
The history that touched me the most was a history of a young man, a high school student, who was caught up in the crisis, you know, with his 2 brothers and a cousin, 4 of them, in the Amarad area, 1 kilometer away from the presidential house. They were arrested by the presidential guy. They were asked where they came from. They presented their IDs. All the bodyguards did was to throw away their IDs, and you know, suddenly they start shooting at them, and the 3 other, his 2 brothers and his cousin, all of them died. The guy survived after sustaining 7 bullets in the body.
So Jimmy, we hear stories like these, and that makes our community wonder what can be done. So we have this tweet asking that basically from Stephen. He says, could the humanitarian crisis provide a common ground for peace negotiations?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's heartbreaking really to hear all what's happening. As a diaspora South Sudanese who has been involved in advocacy, we never expected that South Sudan would get to this point, so it's heartbreaking. So I would say, just want to thank all the humanitarian organizations that are working under those dire conditions to try to help the population. And of course, the need for peace is very important. If both sides recognize that without peace and security, it will be very difficult to really get anything moving forward. So that's number 1, to have peace and security in the country. But we also need to look, how do we get back, how did South Sudan get to this point? I'll say for the longest time since the government of South Sudan came into existence, after the signing of the comprehensive peace agreement, there was no much vision, no much focus in terms of investing in agriculture. So food security has always been an issue in South Sudan. Now with the war, it has just exacerbated the situation, making it worse. So just, you know, without any contingency plans right in the beginning to invest in agriculture and all that, with all the resources that's available, there's arable land, and now you have conflict. So, and that's really taken the country far back.
So what you're saying is what we're seeing now is a failure on the part of the government to plan back in 2011 when we saw the celebrations for the birth of a new country, failure to plan back then.
Definitely. Even in 2011, when we had the population that were displaced in Khartoum, when they went back in Warab State, for instance, we had like 350 people die of starvation. That was back then. And now we have conflict, so you can see how dire the situation is now.
So James, I'm just thinking here, I've seen a lot of headlines about looming famine, potential famine, man-made famine. At what point do you feel that you will get more response from the international community? Because right now, you're not at that point. We're not at that point quite yet.
No, and there's no doubt that historically the declaration of a famine, shows a spike in media interest and shows a spike in funding from donors. I think what's really important here, and what the United Nations has been saying for quite a long time, it was 4 or 5 months ago that UNICEF warned that 50,000 children, that's 50,000 children under 5. I mean, these are terrifying numbers, could die unnecessarily by the end of the year. So the point is, the declaration of a famine is a statistical thing. It's important. It's important data to have, but at the same time, whilst Jimmy is absolutely correct that the first and foremost thing South Sudanese need right now is peace. That's very clear. But humanitarian agencies obviously can't wait for peace. They must act in every way they possibly can to reach those most vulnerable South Sudanese. And similarly, we can't wait for the declaration of a famine. Unfortunately, we know children are dying every day now. I tried to follow the path of the smallest children in a malnutrition centre to watch their progress, to show how they could improve over time and what that could mean. And five children over 5 different days all died. So we know children are dying now. We know that the last time there was a famine in the Horn of Africa 3 years ago, by the time it was declared, half the people who ultimately died were dead. The world's moved on from that. We can't allow that. We're morally obliged to do much more, and I think that's what agencies on the ground have realised. Money is not always the answer. Of course, there's many more things, but in this case, funds, financial support makes an enormous difference. The great bulk of those people who need to be reached are in very difficult areas. Accessibility it's a difficult country to move around. It's the wet season.
James, how much help are you getting from the government right now, the South Sudanese government? Are you working with them? Are you able to partner with them?
Yeah, we are, absolutely. It's very important in a time like this, particularly in this malnutrition, where we're trying to reach 175,000 severe, acute, malnourished under 5-year-olds. Government is one of those partners who we're working with to what we call scale up, to reach more. We know we've got to reach 3 times the number of children we are now. So it's a case of working with government, Ministry of Health, and many of the others. And part of government's role, of course, is to facilitate humanitarian efforts in terms of access, in terms of getting around the country. But as Jimmy said, peace is still the number one.
Well, speaking of facilitating that access, there is a tweet here from Susie, who tweets us from South Sudan, saying the government can help by decreasing the number of roadblocks in South Sudan so that aid can pass through. So Awan, when you hear that, you hear about the hindrances to aid, what do you say?
Well, about the roadblocks, when we talk of roadblocks, we know there could be cases that could be hindering, and our president made serious orders that were passed to the ministries of Interior, National Security and Defense, and also to the governors in the respective states. The roadblocks that we know are very natural, and that's what I mentioned earlier about the roads themselves. In South Sudan, we do not have access in many areas in the country currently during the rainy season. So that's why you see the air dropping, and we have been doing a lot to manage how to balance service to our people, and also being mindful of our international community workers who are also helping us. When we have the country after December 15, the situation wasn't normal. So it was not easy reaching other places that are under control of the rebels. At the same time, we need these people to be helped. And sometimes the government was doing a lot of precautions, telling the right situation that could be encountered by the aid agencies, and those advice were always given in good faith, so that we also do not risk the lives of our people who are coming to serve us in the country.
All right, so Minister, what is the plan, Minister? What is the plan then to resolve this humanitarian crisis, which is basically made by the political situation that's happening right now in South Sudan? What's the plan?
The plan, as I mentioned earlier, I said our government and President has reached out earlier. We have now IGAD peace talks that were supposed to continue, and with the principle of inclusivity to bring all other stakeholders in the peace negotiations.
Okay, so the plan is to maybe stop the fighting. Now, how realistic is that in terms of the time? Because if you're looking at so many of the kids who are not getting access to food, who have malnutrition right now, they don't have the time. What's the time span that you're thinking of?
If it was known that one hand could clap, I think government would have brought this peace long time ago.
Right, so it has to be resolved in your favour then, Minister, you're saying?
I mean to say the other party is told the peace talks when we were supposed to have 60 days. That was agreed upon in June. Right. It was agreed that within 60 days we should end the crisis and bring the government of national unity that will bring all the stakeholders.
All right.
So that we move the country forward.
All right, Minister Ho, just take a pause for a moment. Mark, just very quickly, because I have about a minute left in this part of the show, then I will take you all to the post show. What did you want to say?
Very quickly, just there's one thing we haven't really talked about, and it relates to security and humanitarian access. And right now, until peace does come, which is obviously the thing we need to be able to move forward and try and stop this crisis in its tracks. But also what needs to happen is that humanitarian access needs to be respected by all parties. Last week we had an absolutely tragic incident where 6 NGO staff were killed purely because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time due to their ethnicity. They were there to help people, and unfortunately they gave their lives doing that, helping people. And what we really need as well from humanitarian access is not just roadblocks to be opened, not just the roads to be accessible and camps to be accessible, but we need people to respect the fact that humanitarians are working extremely hard in very difficult places under very difficult security situations.
All right,
allow that to happen.
That's Mark Kay. He's from Save the Children. He's going to be in the post show at stream.aljazeera.com. He'll be with James Elder from UNICEF, Awan Golriq, his Minister of Presidential Affairs, and Jimmy Mullah is from Voices for Sudan. If you would like to add your voice to this conversation, hashtag AJStream, and we will take your comments, your questions to the post show. But first, here's Malika with some of the other stories that we're following.
We start in West Africa, where the spread of Ebola has many asking for an experimental drug. Using hashtag #GiveUsTheSerum, West Africans are demanding that a drug used to treat 3 Western patients be made available. Loza tweets, American and Spanish Ebola patients had the freedom to decide to use the serum. We should too. Well, the U.S. on Tuesday approved the Liberian government's request for the treatment, but UN officials warned supplies are limited. Next, we turn to Australia, where one politician's remarks have become the subject of ridicule. Referring to the impact of a proposed fuel tax, Treasurer Joe Hockey said, "The poorest people don't have cars or drive very far." Australians mocked Hockey with the hashtag "other things the poor don't do," which has been tweeted more than 3,000 times. "The poor don't swallow all the wealth," Mark tweets, yet leave everyone else to starve. And our last story is out of India, where a photo shoot featuring acid attack survivors has gone viral. Photographer Rahul Saharan said he used the women as models because they define beauty. The clothing in the shoot was designed by Rupa, herself an acid attack survivor. Have a listen to what she had to say. Rupa is now raising money to open her own boutique. For more on these stories, you can head over to stream.aljazeera.com. Femi?
That's a remarkable story. It caught my eye, and I couldn't decide whether it was too difficult to actually share with people, or whether that was the exact reason why you actually had to share it with people. It's amazing. You can see it on the Twitter feed of my Twitter feed on stream.aljazeera.com and also at AJStream as well. Now, for the next show, we are going to speak with 4 royal heads of state. How's your curtsy, Malika Bilal?
You know my name means queen.
Oh my goodness. All right, 5 heads of state, and I'm a princess, so it's going to be all royalty all of the time on tomorrow's show. Now that is a tease. You'll find out exactly what we're talking about on Thursday. Stay with us. The post show is next at stream.aljazeera.com. See you on live. Hello, welcome back. We're discussing the looming man-made famine in South Sudan. So let's get right back to that conversation. Minister Owen, I just get this sense of this incredible disappointment with South Sudan, with what's happening right now. And it's a country that's got so many resources. How do you respond to people who are saying, we feel let down? There's been so much in the way of support and aid, and now we're in a situation where famine is potentially about to happen, and it's not because of a drought, it's not because the crops failed. How do you respond to that?
Well, I do agree as South Sudanese, and also one of the leadership in the country, and as a citizen also, I feel as South Sudanese, we led many people who supported our country during the decades of struggle to be independent. It wasn't something that we really intended to have it in this way, and it has heartbreaking for everybody. We do acknowledge that fact, and at the same time we appreciate also the fact that we were not let alone. People rushed to us to support our people, especially at these difficult times that our country is going through. People always love to come to South Sudan, and we were delighted when we have our independence. Many people join us. Today, people join us in a situation that is not really expected to be. And as such, we need seriousness from the other side, as well as the government is so serious with the international community. We need to stop this situation and get the country back to normal. So I do really believe this is the right concern of our friends who supported us.
So Minister, Mark made a very good point earlier. He said that there were aid workers who were actually killed in the line of duty. They were just trying to help. They happened to belong to a particular ethnic group. That is why they were killed. How much security are you at least able to offer to the people who are coming to help you?
We had a press release that was issued today about that incident.
Right, a press
release. When we were in Washington.
But what can you really do to help? Not a press release. What can you really do to help?
That's why we have places that we control. We do not have control all over the south in many areas that rebels are controlling. Also, the people who made this incident were some of the militias that were coming from Khartoum, called Maban Defense Force. It's not the SPLA that killed these innocent civilians and also the aid workers. And we condemn it. We know we do not really condone such things.
Sure.
And as a government, we are always doing our best to address such crises. We also seek the support of the UNAMIS. And most cases, we feel that if they are there, it could give also confidence on the people who might lose hope that this country is not doing a good thing, and the people who may feel that they are being targeted ethnically,
Minister,
we are accepting the other
just see what Mark has to say about that.
To help internationally.
Mark, how do you feel about that? How do you feel that your workers on the ground? Do you feel encouraged by what the minister is just saying?
I think the minister makes a good point in that it takes two parties to be involved in this, and it's not just the government who need to respect the safety and security of humanitarian workers. The true fact is that as humanitarians, we are impartial, we're neutral, and we are working in lots of places that aren't government controlled. And so it's just as much a responsibility of those opposing forces to make sure that we're able to go about our job and do what we need to do to help the most vulnerable. Saying that, obviously we appreciate the entire international community, the government of South Sudan, everyone involved, to really make sure that the statement coming out is that if you target aid workers, you will be that we will follow that up, and that we will make sure that those people are held to account.
Malika.
James, in the midst of all that we're hearing, there's some pretty strong words from our community who's watching this show and tweeting in. Widadi says, South Sudan is a failed state. Its politicians operate like rebels instead of statesmen. They had a unique opportunity to build a state, instead descended into clan and ethnic rivalries, and they betrayed the purpose of South Sudan. James, do you feel like you're working in a failed state?
No, I don't. I don't pass judgment on that. But I think the question Femi asked about the level of disappointment, no one is more disappointed than South Sudanese, and it's to sense the atmosphere in across South Sudan when they got independence. The energy and to watch South Sudanese who'd lived in the diaspora to return to that country with such hope. They're the people who have been crushed. And I think it's important to remember, whilst we've talked so much about the humanitarian situation and the fear we have, not just of a looming famine, but of, well, the reality of children dying today, we must also remember that those other things that are impacting children from the beginning of this conflict. We've just had this last week, a group of eminent Africans from the African Union come in and call this nothing less than a war on children. That was their words. In the same week, we had Human Rights Watch, who have looked at South Sudan for 25 years, even in the time when there was when it was Sudan and the civil war was going on, and they've called it that they've seen worst atrocities against civilians than they've ever seen. So we go back to what Jimmy said in your studio there in DC, that peace is the priority here, and that's really what government must focus on. Government, of course, is the state actor. They have a higher responsibility, and that is what the children most require at this point. Humanitarian agencies, I think, are doing an amazing job in very difficult circumstances, as Mark has pointed out. But that job will continue to get more and more difficult until the opposition and the government sit down and find a way to bring peace to South Sudanese.
So I have to show this to our audience because it's something that we don't actually get to see very often. We're talking about famine, we're talking about something very, very technical and very specific. This is from our sister channel, AJ+. Have a listen to this.
From food insecurity to famine, according to the UN, a famine is when at least 20% of households face extreme food shortages, and there is acute malnutrition in over 30% of the population, and when there are 2 deaths per day for every 10,000 people.
All right, so we're not there yet. James, in your gut, what's your gut telling you about where we're going to be in maybe a month's time from now?
Well, sadly, I have far brighter people than me, so I don't need to rely on my gut. But we can go back four or five months. The resident coordinator, the most senior official on the ground in South Sudan, who travels heavily, Toby Lanza, I think you saw a tweet of his earlier. He warned of famine-like conditions. The Secretary General's done the same. So the point, those statistics you saw are absolutely correct, and there's another meeting of the IPC, which is the group that will look at the next data. That's all very important, and of course it can be a catalyst for press and for donors. I'm always refreshed that organisations like Al Jazeera become interested before those major headlines. But of course, as I say, children are dying every single day. We know that. They are dying of famine-related diseases. They are dying because they're moving in areas where they have unclean water, where there's disease. They've lost their lone possessions. They've lost the ability to plant. That situation will deteriorate and deteriorate and deteriorate. Whether or not we have a famine, I don't know. But I do know, as everyone else does on the ground, that children are dying every day, and they're dying unnecessarily.
Jimmy, I've got to be honest here. We've done so many South Sudan shows, starting up here and we're ending down here. I feel terrible. I feel so disappointed. But you have family in South Sudan. This is your country. What do you feel in your gut will happen?
Well, I mean, since all of us recognize that there's a humanitarian tragedy there, first of all, there should be immediate help from the international community.
Sure. So we've got that, and we made that very clear during the whole show.
Yeah.
But you have family there.
Yes. I want to. There should be peace in South Sudan. That's really number one.
Right.
And having peace is key. South Sudan does not need war at all.
Okay, Malika Bilal, where are you going to leave us? I
want to end with some hope and some not so hopeful.
All right, what are you going to give us first?
I will give you this one first. This is from Mansour, who says, at the beginning, I thought there was an opportunity, but that was wishful thinking. South Sudan was destined to fail, but because that sentiment is not the only one we're seeing online, I'll end with this one from Emma, who says, there is still hope for South Sudan.
Okay. I want to thank our guests for being part of this conversation. Jimmy Mala, Awan Goldiak, Mark Kay and James Elder. We really appreciate you helping us understand this issue much better. On the next show, we talk with some unique members of royalty, but they might not be quite who you'd expect. Now that's a tease if I ever heard one. You have to find out on Thursday's show to find out what I'm talking about. I will see you online.